Okay, for my first persuasive speech, we have my mom, my dog, and Hank as my audience member. Okay, so for the speech, it's going to be about 9/11, and I'm going to be introducing a whole new perspective, and just to see if this changes your mind about what happened with 9/11, because there is a lot of controversy surrounding it, whether it was Bush who had a hand in 9/11, or if it really were terrorists and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So as we already know, what happened with 9/11 is September 11th, 2001, where the Twin Towers were struck by planes, and the first plane hit one tower, and people at first thought it was an accident until the second plane hit another tower. And obviously, as we know, those planes were hijacked by Iraqis, and they were called part of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. So obviously we saw this as a terrorist attack. Then later, there's a third plane that hit the Pentagon, and then there's another plane, the fourth plane or the lost plane, that was going to hit the White House, but people on the plane took over for the hijacker, and the plane ended up landing in a field in Pennsylvania. So this is what we do know, and they also thought it was by the Afghans too. So at this time, George Bush was the president, and he announced a military campaign to destroy Al-Qaeda and to overthrow the Taliban, because with the hijackings, this caused a lot of discourse and chaos for Americans, because they thought that they were under attack and this could potentially be another world war. And so he stating this allowed a lot of Americans to feel better, because then they didn't have to worry so much about more attacks, and people felt if he has the authority to do anything as president, then this will help give them peace and a nice state of mind. So Bush used 9/11 to bring America together as a united front. So as we know, when all this happened, the firefighters, the first responders that got to the site, a lot of them were killed due to the towers falling. And with all the damage and so many people volunteered to help clean it up, all Americans were scared, so everyone just came together and basically fought for the U.S. back against the terrorists. So there's a group called the 9/11 Truth Movement, and it was a group of skeptical people or skeptics about 9/11. So this is very important to notice, but these people included engineers and architects. So these are people who know their way around huge buildings like the Twin Towers or the World Trade Center, because those buildings were 100+ floors. So these conspiracy comments consisted of, how did World Trade Center 7 implode from fire? Because it was around 5 p.m. the same day the World Trade Center 7 was caught on fire, which this one was more like 40 floors, and certain floors had a dedicated service. So some were like for CIA, FBI, it had certain floors. So this World Trade Center was specialized for the FBI. So thermite residue, which is metal oxide / elemental metals, was found in the wreckage, and that's only found whenever implosions occur. So it was found in the wreckage of all World Trade Centers, so including the towers and number 7. So this leads to people thinking that this was an implosion, not an explosion, because first of all, it was recorded, and as you see one of the towers go down, it falls into itself. If it were to explode, it would be very different. But you see it fall and crumble, and then you see the second one fall and crumble, and you don't see World Trade Center 7 fall and crumble until way later, after the first two have already collapsed. And it happens with controlled demolition, like implosions. Also, another thing, office fires can't burn through hot structural metals, because, especially steel, because it's non-combustible, meaning it can't catch on fire because there's no fuel. And you can't try to light a table on fire because there's no fuel to ignite it. It would take a long time, but a table is very different from steel. So this also leads because people had the idea that maybe the jet fuel could have been strong enough to burn the structural steel, but that goes back. Fuel can't ignite the steel. It's non-combustible, like I said. So whether the fire could have occurred or the jet fuel, steel cannot burn the way. It can't burn a way to cause the building to collapse. A former LAPD detective had major skepticism of 9/11. He said the same day 9/11 occurred, the fighter aircraftmen were doing a live fly hijack drill. So there was 22 hijackings occurring, but those were part of the drill. So the men who were in the aircraft didn't know that 9/11 was occurring because they thought it was part of the hijack drill. So that caused why it's called the NORAD, which is the defense. It watches the skies and the seas. It protects the America or North America, so Canada, America, all that, from air and missile attacks. So back to the LAPD detective. This means they didn't know 9/11 wasn't a drill, like I already said. Coming towards the end, there's a term called false flag operation, and this means an act carried out to make it appear someone else did it, which this is what happened with 9/11. It was supposed to be to look like the terrorists, the Afghans, did this, and so they were after the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and putting all the blame on them, but this really all started with Bush. So, in December, a few months after the attack, George Bush was at another school and a kid had asked him how he found out of the news. Obviously, we know that the famous whisper occurred when the day it happened, but that was well after the plane was hijacked and the first tower was hit. And at this time, it's only 2001, only 20 years ago, technology was still very, intelligent, and a lot of the frequencies were thrown off. And so he could have known a lot quicker, but he knew because if you watch the video of when he's in the classroom, you can tell he seems like he's trying to cover something. He doesn't seem like how he does in other interviews if you watch him, or other acts where he's in it. So, George Bush claimed he saw the first plane hit the tower on a TV in the classroom. But the live footage didn't come out until the day after the 12th. So he couldn't have watched the footage happen on the 11th whenever there was no footage to be watched in the moment. So that's where he was caught up in one lie. And he stayed with this lie for obviously years after that and never retracted from it and continued with the same lie. So the attack was planned by Bush for peak oil. So in Iraq, they had oil fields where he wanted to declare war against Iraq for a land war. So he wanted oil, and so if he was able to make it seem like the Iraqis and the Afghans were in against America and hurting America, then he could get the war to happen. And so honestly, the people who were involved in 9/11 with the towers, the Pentagon, the people on the planes who were hijacked, they were just collateral damage. And all the firefighters and first responders who died once again were collateral damage because his goal in the endgame was to use the Iraqis and the hijacking terrorists as bait to have war against them for their oil. So in all, I hope this was able to change your perspective on 9/11 and inform you of details that you probably never heard of. So this is my speech. Thank you.